Hello everybody, this is Tip Top MTG here today with another Magic the Gathering video. In today's video, I'm going to be breaking down all of the spoilers that have come out today being May 25th for Modern Horizons 2. So we're going to break down every single card that they revealed. I'm going to give you guys my opinions on them, and this is all going to be from the perspective of someone who doesn't follow Modern competitively. So I'm going to have a little bit more of a focus on casual play like Commander with a little bit of insight into Modern. So this will be a little bit more casual. So let's just jump right into this. Starting off, we have Chef's Kiss. This is a 1 red instant, and it says gain control of target spell that targets only a single permanent or player. Copy it, then reselect the targets at random for the spell and the copy. The new targets can't be you or a permanent you control. So to essentially break this down, you copy your opponent's spell and then gain control of both, but you don't get to choose the targets. But the targets cannot be you. So for instance, let's say you're in a 1v1 where I think this card is amazing. Imagine your opponent cast Murder. I know that's not really being played in Modern, too expensive, better, options. But just for basic example, 3 mana instant, destroy target creature. You Chef's Kiss it, essentially it reselects the target so it's no longer targeting your creature, and you get a bonus copy that then targets your opponent, or in something they control. Now they could both target the same target, and so it's not always going to work out as well, but I do think it's really interesting. And when you look at it from a card value perspective, as in the amount of cards you put in compared to what you get out, you are spending 1 card to cancel your opponent's card, kill one of their creatures, get a bonus card, and then kill one of your opponent's creatures. So you're almost doing 4 cards worth of value, assuming you're copying a kill spell. But here's the thing, you're also gaining control of that spell. So if it's something like target player, deal 2 damage or 4 damage to target player, you can have it be a direct damage spell. But note, the new targets can't be you or a permanent you control. So if your opponent has a spell that says target player takes an extra turn, yes, you can Chef's Kiss it, but you will never be the target for that. So in like a multiplayer game, there could be something interesting with that. But I think it's just a super powerful effect that could be really interesting. And so I think it's something unique, kind of crazy, and that's what I love about Modern Horizons. Either way, next we have a reprint translated into Mog Salvage. This was a card printed a very long time ago, back in 2000, so 21 years ago. This is going to be a card new to Modern, an instant that says, if an opponent controls an island and you control a mountain, you may play Mog Salvage without paying its mana cost, and it says destroy target artifact. So this is a 3 mana spell, and it honestly doesn't feel that great. It's obviously a reprint, so I'm not going to discuss it in Commander. In Modern, it may see play in sideboards. It is definitely one of those cards that screams, play me in a sideboard. And so I definitely think it's possible there. Of course, I don't know every single artifact removal spell, but this one does seem pretty good if you are going up against a blue deck, and blue decks generally are more likely to be artifact-based. And so I do think it could see play in that sense. But again, I am no Modern meta expert. Next, we have Zabaz, the Glimmer Wasp. It's a 1-cost legendary artifact creature insect 0/0 with modular 1, meaning you can essentially have it enter the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter, or a 1/1. You can have it form as a 1/1 if I'm not mistaken. But then it says if a modular triggered ability would put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on a creature you control, you may put that many +1. So essentially, if you have modular 2, you would instead basically get the effects of modular 3 if you choose the counter version. And so that's kind of interesting. It's a modular based mechanic, which is interesting. And I lied. It's not letting you create them. I just wanted to double check this. It either enters the battlefield with a number of +1/+1 counters, and put them on another creature when they die. So this will enter with 1 +1/+1 counter, and when it dies, the counters will be moved. And what makes this really interesting is the fact that, it enters with 1, that's a triggered ability, so it's actually going to enter with 2, and then when it dies, you get to move it onto another creature. And when you do that, then it's going to put 3. And then when, that happens, then when that creature dies, it's 4. So it keeps getting bigger and bigger. And so that's actually a really cool effect, especially for 1 colorless or generic mana, I should say. And then you can pay a red and destroy target artifact you control. which is a little bit weird when you think about it, but essentially it's a way to sacrifice artifacts without sacrificing them. I'm sure this is to get around some shenanigans, but yeah, you are technically destroying an artifact you control, which if it had modular would then let you move around counters, and then you can pay a white to give it flying. Now, first off, this is a lot of stuff for 1 mana, and I also think the fact that this is a legendary creature that costs 1 mana is really interesting. We don't have a ton of these. I mean, we have, that 0 drop from Commander Legends, and there obviously are some, but it is very rare that we see a legendary creature this low, especially one that is colorless in mana cost, but multicolor in, color because of those 2 activated abilities. So I think it's interesting in like a modular based deck. I think it's kind of cool that you could do like this weird self-sacrificing artifact creatures. I think it's kind of interesting and weird. So basically it's a Modern Horizons card. Either way, next we have Kitchen Imp. It is a 4-cost black creature imp 2/2 with flying and haste, and it has madness for a black. Now, expect to see a lot of madness just because they have revealed already that is the black-red theme, so I'm sure this is pretty much only in here to help with that theme, although 1 mana 2/2 flying haste is not bad, especially when it can also be used for discard fodder. Next, we have this card. This card is a Progenitor Ooze. It's a 2 green legendary creature ooze, 2/2 with Storm. Back in Zendikar Rising, they introduced some new rules that said permanent spells can be copied, and when they do, they enter as tokens. And someone, somewhere on some Reddit, made a joke, what if you gave a permanent storm, which means that whenever you cast a spell, copy it for each spell cast before it this turn. So the idea here is like, you cast 3 other spells before, your opponents cast 3 other spells before, you actually get 3 copies. Now, you might be thinking, but this is legendary, that's useless. But not really, because Ave is not legendary if it's a token, but it enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each other ooze you control. So if you have 5 of these entering the battlefield, they're all entering as 7/7s, assuming you had no other oozes. And actually it says others. If you had 5 enter the battlefield, they'd enter as 6/6s. But I think it's really, really interesting. It's a commander that can be cloned. So it's like legendary purely for the fact that it wants to be, a commander. This card doesn't work on a like legendary card, but because it's a commander, they added that little rules text there so that it works. And obviously Modern Horizons is primarily a modern product, but of course it is going to make waves in those older formats like Commander. And so I think this will be a really interesting one. I don't know necessarily how popular it'll be, but it's kind of cool. Next, we have Priest of Fell Rites. It's a white and a black for a creature, human warlock. You can tap and pay 3 life and sacrifice it to return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, activate only as a sorcery. So 2 mana to do that effect is pretty good, especially when it's also on a creature. However, you do have to remember, it does have to survive for a turn. You also are paying 3 life. But you can also unearth it, which means you pay 5 mana, 2 of it being colored, white and black. Return this card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste, exiled at the beginning of the next end step, or if it would leave the battlefield, unearth only as a sorcery. So yes, you could go attack with your 2/2, but I think the idea is you bring it back and then revive something else. So essentially you can revive something for 2 mana, and it happens a turn later, and then you can revive something for 5 mana, and it happens essentially instantly. And so it's kind of this double res, and I think it's really powerful, and a lot of decks are going to want it, because a lot of those reanimator decks are looking for creatures in their graveyard, and the fact that your, good recursion spell that is actually double use can be a creature as well is very, very potent, and I think that's going to be really, really awesome. And also, obviously, if you like self-mill it, you can then unearth it. So very, very good. Next, we have Grist, the Hunger Tide. It's 1 black and a green for a legendary planeswalker Grist, 3 loyalty. So there was a leak about this, but it turns out to be true. As long as Grist isn't on the battlefield, it's a 1/1 insect creature in addition to its other types. By the way, that is in addition to its other type. So it is still a planeswalker in your library. It is still that, but it's also a creature, meaning if you have a spell that says search your library for a creature with mana value 3 or less, you could go search for Grist, even though it's a planeswalker, and put it onto the battlefield. Similarly, if something says, return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, it does that. But when it's on the battlefield, it is not a creature. So it cannot be targeted by creature removal and all of that. So it's very interesting in the fact that it doesn't seem to do much unless you are building around it or have interaction with it. But there are some really cool things you can do with it. Either way, you can +1 to create a 1/1 black and green insect creature token, then mill a card. If an insect card was milled this way, put a loyalty counter on Grist and repeat this process. So essentially, if you're gonna kind of mill a card, and if it's an insect, do it again, and you're getting the loyalty for it. So it's theoretically possible to +1 and then like put 42 mill counters, insect counters if you had 42 insects in a row. But that seems highly unlikely and is probably more of a niche case. Then you can, use a -2. Also, by the way, if he mills like another version of himself, like if you're in Modern here and you +1 and then mill another Grist, he counts as an insect, so that's kind of cool. But you can -2 to sacrifice a creature when you do destroy target creature or planeswalker. So it's a little bit more conditional, but on the 3 mana, I'm glad it wasn't just -2 destroy target creature or planeswalker. You do need to obviously sack that creature, but you probably have one from that +1 ability. Then you can -5 and each opponent loses life equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. So yeah, a deck, this card is very much, I'm gonna mill myself. And I think that's kind of the idea here, is that you can throw this in that deck and your normal like creature recursion spells will also be able to hit Grist. I think that's the whole idea behind the card, and I think it's really, really interesting. We're still missing one. They revealed that there were going to be 3 planeswalkers, so we have Dakin and Grist. It'll be interesting to see who else. Next, we have Garth One Eye. So this is a Wooburg commander. So here's our 5-color commander of the set. It is a legendary creature, human wizard. And by the way, that doesn't mean there's not going to be another one. It's just, it seems like there's always at least one in every set because they are very popular. So it's a 5/5 for 5, and you can tap and choose a card name that hasn't been chosen from among this card name list. And we're going to read through that here in a second. 99% sure that if you flicker him, you can choose the same one again, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but you still pay the cost. So essentially, you tap and cast one of the spells listed. So we have Disenchant, Brain Geyser, Terror, Sheevan Dragon, Regrowth, and Black Lotus, meaning yes, it is possible to now play or cast a Black Lotus. And that's really, really cool. And in Modern, obviously you can do it in older formats. And I think that's really, really awesome. Now, in order for me to really judge this, I need to make sure everyone knows what these cards are. So let's go in order. Disenchant, 2 mana, instant, destroy target artifact or enchantment. That's great. This guy has a tap, pay 2 mana, destroy target artifact or enchantment. You can do that once. What else does he have? He has Brain Geyser, X, blue, sorcery, target player draws X cards. So you can tap him, pay 2 mana to destroy an artifact or enchantment, but you can also then pay all of your mana to draw cards. It is a sorcery, so timing rules, I believe, do apply, but that's something that I'd have to wait for the official rules. It depends on very specific wording cases. Black is Terror, 1 in a black instant. Destroy target non-artifact and non-black creature. It can't be regenerated. So we have artifact and enchantment removal, creature removal, and card draw. So far, pretty good. Sheevan Dragon, 6 cost, 5/5 creature dragon with flying, and you can pay red, and it gets +1/+0 until end of turn. So now you also have a creature if you need to expand your board. And then you have Regrowth, which is 1 in a green to resurrect something from your graveyard to your hand, which does technically mean if you have 2 of Garth, you can, tap him to regrow another Garth, and then maybe sacrifice your current Garth, and then play the new Garth, and then use that to regrow. Obviously, it's a tap ability, so you can't do that instantly, but if you do get this kind of cycle going, you can keep it alive if your opponents keep removing it. And then, of course, the big one, the splashy one, Black Lotus, 0 cost artifact, tap, sack, add 3 mana of any 1 color to your mana pool. I think this is going to be a very popular commander. It lets you play with Black Lotus legally, and so I think that's really, really awesome. It also, it works in such a way that you play this, and if you can untap with it, you tap for Black Lotus, and it pays for the commander tax, +1 actually, and even if it doesn't, you just ramped 3. And then you also then get all this extra value. So this is probably going in a deck that's going to want to flicker him, because if you flicker him, then you can recreate things. It probably wants haste. It probably wants untappers. And it has access to all of that because it is in all 5 colors. Overall, very, very interesting card. We've never really seen, or at least to my knowledge, this style of effect, and I really like it. Next, we have Extruder. It's a 4-cost artifact creature juggernaut. So this is a reprint, but it's a 4/3 with Echo 4, meaning you play this for 4, and then the next turn you can pay 4 to sack it. You can pay 4 to not have to sack it. So it's essentially an 8-cost 4/3, but you can sacrifice an artifact to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So I'm not a huge fan of this card. I get that, being able to just sack an artifact first off as a cost is already pretty good. And then the fact that you're putting +1/+1 counters on creatures is pretty good. Of course, you can play this as a 4-cost 4/3 and then sacrifice it to itself rather than the echo cost in order to put a counter on another creature. So you do have those little things, but I am not a huge fan of this card. Next, we have this card, which can be translated into Steel Camel. It's a 3-cost artifact creature, Camel, 2/2, and it enters the battlefield with 2+1/+1 counters on it. So it's a 4-cost, or a 3-cost 4/4, okay? But it doesn't untap during your untap step as long as it has a +1/+1 counter on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may move a +1/+1 counter from Steel Camel to target creature. So it's essentially a 4/4 that you get to attack with once, because it doesn't enter the battlefield tapped and it doesn't untap, but that doesn't mean it can't attack. So you're probably going to attack with it, and then the following turns, you move the counters around, and then as soon as it becomes a 2/2, you get to keep it. So it's kind of a prolonged way to put counters on things, but if you want to do that in colorless, maybe you're in a deck in like Commander where you're very limited on your choices to put counters on things, this could be interesting. It's weird, and I don't know if it's necessarily good, but I don't know. It's a little bit strange. It like definitely doesn't want more counters on it. I don't know. I'm trying to think about when I would want this over some other cards, like the Uzalith. I know it doesn't come with counters, but it just seems so much better. The Ozolith. Then we have a reprint of Patriarch's Bidding, which this card has not seen a reprint in forever, hence why it is, new to Modern. It is a 5-cost black sorcery where each player chooses a creature type, and each player returns all creatures of a type chosen this way from their graveyard to the battlefield. So this is a really awesome card, because if your opponent is not running Tribal, this can basically be your opponent returns one thing from their graveyard to the battlefield, or 1 to 2 things, and you return your entire graveyard to the battlefield. So definitely a very, very powerful effect. Of course, if you are in that mirror, it's not as great. And of course, in something like Commander, you're more likely to be running against Tribal because you have 3 opponents. And obviously, this isn't a new card there. But the fact that it's getting a reprint in this set is great. It'll make it more accessible, and it's pretty interesting. Next, we have this card, which can be translated into Young Necromancer. So we have Liliana there, a 5-cost black creature, human warlock, 2/3. And when it enters the battlefield, you may exile 2 cards from your graveyard. When you do, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So again, another creature that's doing resurrection stuff. Pretty good. However, I don't think this one's nearly as good as the previous one. In limited, it's probably really awesome. You do need to have that cost of being able to exile the cards, which you might not want to do if your deck is all about not exiling your cards, keeping them in the graveyard. But I do think it has some value, especially in limited. And it's not an awful flicker target, but you do need to have that those cards in your graveyard to exile. Then we have Voidmere. This one was actually spoiled yesterday, but it was after my spoiler video came out. It's a 2-cost artifact, and it says whenever a player casts a spell, if no colored mana was spent to cast it, counter that spell. So against things like Tron in Modern, this will be pretty good. Of course, they can implement blue lands and things in order to get around this. But what I think this also does that's pretty big is avoids mana cheating. I mean, Fires of Invention, if someone's running that, they're not actually paying mana for their spells, which means that no colored mana was spent to cast it. Therefore, it gets countered. So this shuts off purely colorless spells that are paid using purely colorless mana, and free casted spells, which I actually think is going to be the bigger use case. So I think this is actually going to see play in a lot of sideboards. And then we have Bottle Golems. It's a 4-cost artifact creature golem, 3/3 with trample. And it says when it dies, you gain life equal to its power. Not impressive in any way, in my opinion. It's also just not that interesting. I'm just going to move on. And then we have Sword of Hearth and Home. This is another sword. We saw, I believe, 2 with the original Modern Horizons. And so it says, equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has protection from green and white. By the way, it's a 3-cost artifact equipment with equip 2, but whatever. This is kind of following a cycle. And then it says, whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, exile up to 1 target creature you own, then search your library for a basic land card. Put both cards onto the battlefield under your control, then shuffle. So essentially, you flicker a creature and tutor for a basic land and put it right on the battlefield. So ramp and generate value when you hit. This actually seems really, really good to me. You're going to have this in a deck that wants to flicker things. You don't need to be in green and white in order to run this card. So for instance, our 5-color friend might really like this card because you can, flicker him, which may allow you to do some more interesting things. So yeah, definitely powerful. I like it more than some of the swords, but do not think it's probably not the best sword. All right, guys, so that is it for the main spoilers. I'm not really going to talk too much about the Modern Horizons 1 retro frames, just because they are only in the collector boosters. They don't impact draft. They're not new to any format, but these are available. I want to make sure you guys are in the know of what is there. Alright guys, that is going to do it for this video. If you found it enjoyable or useful or any of that, hit that like button, subscribe to see more content like this, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.